Hello everybody, welcome to part 2 of 2, or possibly 2 of 3, depending kind of how videos goes, of our basic IFR flying tutorial. So in this video, we've already gone ahead and done everything as far as our flight planning. You probably watched that component already. Now we're going to get to the actual, can we fly the flight plan we developed? Now, some of you were asking why we chose such a short route. The reason, again, is because we're using an aircraft that doesn't really cruise that quickly. Otherwise, we'd be here for quite a long time in order to actually get to our destination. So first things first, when we're doing IFR flying, we've got to make sure our instruments are set up correctly. You've got to have a plan. You've got to be thinking things through. Now, the nice thing is I did actually set this VFR map to match up exactly basically what we had predicted when we did this over in Sky Vector. And again, this is where we're going to be following using VOR only. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go over to our radios. We have our communication radio on the left. We have our navigation radios on the right. On the right-hand side, the first frequency I want to set is Hampton VOR. Now, the frequency for this, if you remember from last time, is 113.60. As a matter of fact, when I swap it, I wouldn't be surprised if the needle flies. Yeah, it does. Good, we can receive it. On the standby frequency, I'm going to be setting the ILS frequency for Groton. Now, you're probably sitting there going, wait, why would you do that now? Well, we're going to be using the other navigation radio to go ahead and help us line up with the runway. We're going to use the main one to go ahead and do the landing. It's just simply a review, to be honest. So the ILS frequency at Groton for ILS 5 is going to be 111.3. So I'm going to go over here at 111.3. We really should not be able to pick that up from now because there's an island in the way. On my secondary navigation radio, I'm going to go ahead and also dial in 113.60. You're probably sitting here going, why would you do that? Well, we're going to use our secondary CDI down here to know when we need to change to the other frequency. Because basically what we're going to do, if I pull up the map again real quick, is we're going to cruise over here to Hampton. Once we see the needle start to move, we're then going to follow a different radial off of Hampton to line us up with Mondi. This route actually has us doing this little arc here. We're actually going to be proceeding direct. So we're going to go ahead and set that to 113.60. Now you're probably wondering, what should we set? By the way, notice it moved. You're probably also wondering, what are we going to set our standby frequency to? Well, in the case that I get horribly lost, which is a pretty good chance, I'm not the world's best instrument pilot, I'm going to set it to Groton VOR, which I've done now here. Now let's go ahead and take a look at our two CDIs. The top one is going to be our primary. So what we want to do is dial in the course we want to go towards Hampton. So if you remember, our towards course is going to be 105 degrees. So I'm going to go ahead and crank this thing. Don't be surprised if the needle goes dancing. 105 degrees. Beautiful. Now, the one down here is going to be the one we're going to follow to line us up with the ILS, and then we'll follow this one to the ground. So this particular one, I'll take a look at my notes real quick, looks like it's going to be at 4 degrees. Again, that needle should not move at this time. So once this needle starts moving towards the center, we're going to follow this one instead of following this one. So after takeoff, we're going to climb to 3,000 feet. We're going to make our heading so that we can intercept this radial. In this particular case, it looks like if I were to split the difference between maximum approach and maximum forward, looks like it's going to be about 60 degrees. So after takeoff, we're going to take a left turn to 60 degrees, climb to 3,000 feet, intercept this radial, follow this radial until this radial starts going to the left, follow this radial, and then reset this to get ready for our instrument landing. Whoa, okay. Can we do that without a DMA? Well, we'll find out very, very shortly. So the aircraft is all set. I've done everything else for my checklist. Going to go ahead and kill the parking brake. Let's go ahead and give it full power, and let's get rolling. Weather for today, we have a nice little wind coming out of the northeast. Expect to see some gusts pretty much this entire trip. So don't be surprised if my flying is not nearly as good as it could be if I had the automatic pilot. Again, for instrument conditions, I usually recommend the automatic pilot. 50 knots, we're going to go ahead and give it a tug, and we are up. Now, again, it's bad form to start turning before we get to the end of the runway. But again, you guys have a lot of time, and so don't have a lot of time, rather. So I'm going to go ahead and skip this normal procedure and make your life just a little bit easier today. Go ahead and take myself a nice gentle left. Lovely. And up we go into the haze. I love instrument flying. Pull my nose up just a little bit. I'm getting a little fast. That's pretty good right there. And no, I'm not shading with a little map on the corner or anything like that. I just don't need that. I planned myself out pretty darn well here. Okay, so now we are on our heading of 60 degrees. We're making about 70 knots. I'm well trimmed out. So the first thing we're going to be looking for is movement of this needle. We expect to see that noodle. What's a noodle, right? I mean, noodles are good. Ramen noodles, cup of noodles, noodles. Spaghetti's a noodle. That needle will start moving slowly towards the center as we start getting towards it. Once we get to it, we're then going to go ahead and turn the aircraft towards about 105 degrees, and hopefully, assuming the crosswind doesn't get us too strong, we should be able to basically maintain the same heading as our desired course. Keep in mind, that never happens in the real world. It's always windy. I'm going to swing us to the right just a teeny tiny bit. This aircraft is not really good at instrument flying. Don't worry about the blinking light. That just tells us we crossed the middle marker. Doesn't surprise me. Now, this is not the best aircraft for instrument flying. We don't have a critical piece of equipment called the DME, that's distance measuring equipment, which could actually tell us how far away we are from certain objects, in this case, VOR stations. Without that, we have to use intersections in order to identify how far we're away from things. That's a bit of a process, and it's way beyond what we're going to be taking a look at today. One thing worth noting, too, is as I'm sitting here kind of cruising gently, I'm constantly looking between each one of my instruments. For example, you might know that the attitude indicator shows that I'm pretty level, but if you look at the turn and bank indicator, you can see every once in a while the aircraft likes to hike itself to the left a little bit. That's just that P factor and torque taking over. Again, without those little details, it's just not the same thing. All right, in just a moment, I expect that lubber line, which is the name of that noodle line, up there it goes, it's going to start wiggling as we start getting very close to that jetway. Now remember, that jetway is actually not a jetway, it's a Victor airway. That's the one we're going to be following. We saw it in the last video. And there goes the aircraft. It's dragging to the left a little bit. Perfect. Right there. Looks pretty good. It's a bummer we don't have aileron trim in a 152, because that makes this much, much simpler. Don't forget, as you climb, to be doing your usual work as you climb. You want to be thinking about, did I lean the mixture correctly? Am I at the correct RPM? Have I set everything up? Are my lights set up in a way that I'm not blinding myself completely as I'm traveling? You want to be thinking about all those things, but more importantly, you want to fly the plane. That is your priority number one. All right, we got about 300 feet to go before we get to our cruising altitude. Looks like we're just about to start to break out of the clouds. I don't think we're going to get completely clear of the clouds. Notice the optical illusion that creates. Do not let yourself be swayed by what you see or what you feel in your seat. That is a very common thing that you're going to run into when you're first learning to instrument fly in an actual plane. It's an intense sensation. That vertigo gets real. All right, 3,000 feet. Gently level the aircraft off. All right, nicely done. Come down just a little bit. Now look at that optical illusion that cloud will create. Nose down a little bit more, a little bit more. Over to the right, go ahead and back up my RPM. I don't need quite that much. Trim out my mixture a little bit. And we are in great shape. Ooh, this plane just wants to climb. Nice. Whoop. I don't know what the deal with the trim is in this version of Flight Simulator. It's either too fast or too slow. All right, do you see the CDI on the top instrument starting to move towards the center? See it? It's going. It's going. Should just call it the noodle line from now on. Internet meme. All right, so as soon as it gets a little bit closer to center, we're going to go ahead and make our heading towards what that radial was, which was about 105 degrees. All right, my mixture is all nice and leaned out. The aircraft is handling pretty well. It keeps wanting to descend a little bit, but that's not unusual. All right, pick a speed, airplane. Just a moment. Gotta bring myself a little bit back to the left here. We probably could have picked a tighter angle to try to approach it a little more aggressively, but we really didn't need to for this purpose. All right, see how close it's getting to the center? We have to start thinking about backing out of this turn. So I'm actually going to swing my heading towards east. When you're turning as an instrument pilot, concentrate on all your instruments, not just one. I can't tell you how many times you'll get fixated on the vertical speed indicator, for example, and next thing you know, you've way overshot the heading that you were trying to achieve. Now notice east is still slightly to the left of our course, so we're basically trying to nip this thing at a very, very gentle angle. If I were to flip open the map for just a second, you're probably going to see that is not quite what you expected. Because again, we're following that airway. We're not following that particular point. All right, it looks like we're almost to our course. Start coming slightly to the left here. I'm about 100 degrees, even though our desired radial is about 100. And we are on course. Okay, So now one thing I want to look down at is notice the fact that I've gained almost 100 feet. Yuck, that would have failed me if I was taking this as an actual exam. But usually I don't try to explain things as I do them in the real plane. That being said, you will have to put up with the radio in the real plane. There we go. Looks like we're pretty much right on. Fun fact, that little line in that radial from the VOR station is usually about 3 or 4 degrees off in any direction. That is an interesting problem that is not well simulated in simulators, which is kind of a bummer, because they make things a lot more challenging, not that they need to be. So now what are we waiting for? Basically right now, if you look at the bottom CDI, can you see how the lubber line is slowly starting to hike towards the middle? That means we're starting to get physically close to the VOR station. Now, if you had a DME set on your aircraft, you could actually see precisely how many nautical miles away from the station you are. But again, we don't have that. We have to actually do things the hard way. The other thing I'm noticing is my top CDI is drifting slightly to the left, so that wind is probably starting to catch up to us a little bit. So I'm actually going to bring the aircraft very, very gently, slightly left of the course so that we can kind of intersect it a little bit more safely. Again, I'm putting up at that left turning tendency still here. That's pretty good right there. Now we just have to kind of study the line. Now, if you run into a situation where that line suddenly shoots very aggressively one direction or another, that usually means you're very, very close to the station. Don't over-control the plane. Chances are you're doing a pretty darn good job with it anyway, so you shouldn't have to worry about it too much. I gotta admit, it's actually kind of nice not having to talk on the radio while doing this. Swing back to my left just a little bit. I think that crosswind's coming out of the north, so we actually have to put our plane slightly eastish. All right, that's looking pretty good. Not bad, not bad, not bad at all. All right, cool. Now, if I was a more clever person, I would actually go ahead and make that cloud layer a little bit higher so that we'd be a little bit more successful. Or at least have it a little bit more challenging. This is actually pretty easy when you have a fake horizon. That being said, that is a heck of an optical illusion that's creating, and it's really messing with my head. Speaking of which, a really, really cool pro tip is this needle is actually adjustable. So you can actually adjust it up or down in order to make it so that it actually matches when you're truly straight level. Slick trick. All right, looks like the CDI is slipping slight to the right a little bit. So I'm going to bring myself over here. That looks pretty good. Go ahead and level myself back off. I'm going to wait for that needle to kind of recenter again. Again, wait and see is a much safer approach than jerk, jerk, jerk. You're just never going to be able to be sensitive enough to see every teeny tiny change. And again, that needle in the simulator is far more accurate than it is in the real world. In the real world, I've had it reach pretty bad angles. Of course, you don't want that deviation to be bad when you're doing something like, a landing, but we'll deal with that in a little while. Notice the aircraft's gaining some altitude again, so the wind's probably shifting a little bit on me. Nothing unusual. All right, shifting to the right a little bit. Yep, there it goes. Now, I'm looking at the clock now, and it's just about 15 after, which tells me we should be getting very, very close to that station itself. Once we hit the station, remember, we're going to be changing course to start lining us up with the runway. The other thing is, when we get close to the station, is we're going to have to start our descent already, because we're going to be ready to go ahead and land at ILS 5 up in Groton. All right, I'm definitely starting to shift a little bit too far away here. Nice gentle turn to the right again. I'm going to bring it up to, let's see, 112 degrees seems to be pretty safe. Ooh, this thing just wants to climb today. Now, it's funny, in the real planes, you'd have an issue where you only cleaned one wing better than the other, and it would cause your plane to constantly be pulling in that direction. It's just kind of fun. Yeah, I'm definitely getting very close to that station. See how sensitive the needle has gotten? Yep. As a matter of fact, if I hold the perfect course just like this, do you see how the needle is really starting to move? That tells me we're right about to cross Hampton VOR. So that means we can go ahead and execute our turn to bring us to help line up with this instrument here. Now, since we want to follow the tree 4 radial out, I'm basically going to point the plane towards 60 until that needle centers. All right, let's do it. Now, what I'm going to do is concentrate on my turn before I concentrate on my descent. Uh-oh, clouds are a little different over here. See that optical illusion that creates? Oh, look at the needle go. Look at the needle go. Yep, we just crossed the station. So that was almost perfect. Again, I'm not cheating with the map here. I should, though. I really should. Did you see how on the bottom CDI that the little arrow changed to reverse? That just tells me I'm going away from the station now. All right, nice and easy, nice and easy. Lovely. Now you're probably sitting there going, now what? Well, until we capture the CDI again, I should say. Oh, there goes, there goes. Excuse me. Ah, that's some pretty good flying. I'm actually slightly off course. If you take a look at the bottom CDI, do you see how the lubber line is slightly off to the right? I'm actually going to bring it slightly off to the right to intercept it. Once I'm confident that I've captured it fairly effectively, then I'm going to start thinking about descending, in which case it's going to be pea soup time. Time to flop frequencies. All right, so now we need to start planning to get into the ILS approach to Groton. So in this case, I'm going to make sure all my instruments have been reset. I'm going to go double check that I'm pointing the correct direction with my CDI here. This is the OBS. We're approaching runway 5, so that's going to be right there. This is one of my favorite things about having a co-pilot is you can ask them nicely to do that for you, rather than having to sit there and try to divert your concentration from operating the plane. All right, time to descend. How do you descend in instrument conditions? Well, you do it the right way. Simply take your throttle, pull it back just a tiny bit, and as the aircraft slows down, just gently push the nose over so that you maintain the exact same speed you just were at. Now, by doing this, you cause the aircraft to descend without having to adjust that trim, which you spent so much work trying to set up just a minute ago. If you do this right, about 200-300 RPM is usually more than enough to maintain what you need. If you're in a constant speed aircraft, this changes a little bit. Now, you're probably saying, okay, so we're approaching through the fog now. What is going to be our desired altitude that we're going to be traveling to? Well, if you took a look at the ILS plate when we had part 1, you'll notice that we need to be at an altitude of about 1,900 feet. So that's going to be my descent altitude. As this is going, I'm going to have a look at my right-hand side, my lower CDI. I'm trying to keep that needle centered. And what we're waiting for is we're waiting for that top needle to start moving from left to right. Once it starts doing that, that will tell us that we've actually captured the localizer, or if we're really lucky, we'll actually capture the glide slope early so we can start lining ourselves up vertically. That is an easy way to do it. So right now, we're drifting a little to the right, but that's kind of intentional. Now, we're getting a little fast. So the trick here is if you don't want to mess with your trim, back the throttle back just a teeny tiny bit. That should be more than enough to slow you down without affecting your descent rate drastically. Again, you're trying to stay the same speed as you descend. I'm seeing that my lubber line is now perfectly centered on the bottom CDI. I'm going to swing myself to the right. The wind is coming out of my right, though, so I don't want to swing too far to the right. All right, starting to fight the descent a little bit here. Nothing unusual. Now, what you can't see is there's a giant microphone on my face, which makes it hard to see the instruments. So you're just going to have to take my word for it. Come down to my right just a little bit. Oh, man, we have that perfectly centered in the bottom. Nice. This was one of my favorite parts of learning to fly. That's pretty good right there. I'm actually just a touch quick. I should have reduced more RPM than I did earlier. That was my bad, but again, I'm trying to explain as I fly. Now, in the real world, you might have to hold. That is for another day. The other thing you get in the real world is these things called procedure turns, which is your way of lining up with the ILS approach. Fortunately, we're not going to do one of those today. As a matter of fact, if you looked at the chart, it specifically stated we did not need to fly a procedure turn. Bring myself to the right a little bit here. Take a look at my altitude. I got 100 feet to go. Too many things going to happen at once. All right, here's the secret. If you did everything right by setting your trim and power correctly, you should be able to put your power back to what you were previously. Lift up the nose just a tiny bit, and look at that. You shouldn't even have to touch your trim controls if you did that all smoothly. Like I can see I'm just a little fast in the RPM. Awesome. That is a much simpler thing said than it is a simpler thing done. You have to do that a lot to get practice. Okay, did you notice on the top CDI that thing suddenly went boing and flew away from me? The reason it did that is we've just started detecting the signal for our ILS. As a matter of fact, if we really wanted to, we could turn our aircraft closer to north and basically kind of cut the corner if you want to think about it another way. I'm not going to do that. Instead, what I'm going to do, since we spent all that time trying to plan everything, is I'm going to try to line it up so that I hit that point centered evenly. You'll know exactly what I mean when we get a little bit closer. All right, so we just to the left just a tiny bit here. It takes a lot of concentration. And I'm losing a little bit more altitude than I want. I guess I didn't set my power correctly. Speed has not changed, which is awesome. One of the things I always struggle with is transitioning into landing mode. Once you finally do get to your destination, you always run into the problem where it's like you have to slow down to just the right speed, and you got to put your flaps down, you got to make sure everything's right. In this aircraft, you're going to want to make sure you turn your carburetor heat on because you don't want an iceberg in there, especially if it's this foggy. All right, I'm noticing that the glide slope is starting to move as well as our localizer. That means we've done a really good job so far. I'm not proud of this too much though, because if I was better at this, I would never lose any altitude. So I have a lot to learn. That's pretty good. Okay, do you watching real carefully on the top CDI, how it's starting to hike slowly towards the center? I'm also gaining a little bit of altitude, which is sloppy. This aircraft really wants to pull that direction today. That's all right, though. Again, wind and turbulence make this more fun, and as we descend lower and lower, the turbulence is going to get progressively worse. Which is good, because it makes my life interesting. I was one of those people on a plane that, like, when it started bouncing around when you're, like, on an airline, I'd be like, hey, this is like an amusement park ride. And meanwhile, all the people around you are freaking out. I'm sorry, I had to be that guy, but, you know, you have to make the best of any situation. All right, we're looking pretty darn good. I'm amazed how strong that crosswind is. I'm pointing at 40 degrees, even though our desired travel is 34 degrees. So that is going to make this landing a little sideways, which is cool because it makes it more fun for me. All right, do you notice the top is starting to slowly migrate towards the center? See it? See it? That means in just a moment, we're going to have to start landing this plane, which is real stressful. I haven't flown an ILS approach in the real world in, like, literally 9 years. Watching my clock carefully there. Now, one thing I did do in advance, and my flight instructor always beat me up for this, was have an idiot check as far as your clock goes. So I have been cheating a teeny tiny bit looking at the watch. You know, I know how long it should take to get to certain points in this trip. And if I've missed something, that's a good sign I did something wrong and I should go back and reevaluate. And turbulence isn't too bad, but I know it's going to get worse as I get lower. I'm going to have to come to my right a little bit because that crosswind is going to push me right off the bottom radial. Looks good right there. I know some of you are sitting here going, are you just paused? No, this is what flying in a cloud is like. Of course, in a real cloud, you're getting bounced around the entire time. And you get to see all sorts of really, really dirty rain. Really dirty rain. I'm kind of tempted to look in third-person view, but I'm also terrified to take my eyes off the instruments. It's kind of one of those combinations. Now, what I was thinking of doing is doing one more videos in this short series, and basically doing this as well with a glass cockpit aircraft, and showing you how drastically different it is when you do it that way, as opposed to doing it kind of the old-fashioned way like I'm doing right now. But sometimes it's fun to see it the hard way, too. Confirming my frequencies mentally. Checking my clock. Should be right about 25 after I should be centered. And then we'll know that we're on time, in which case, hey, my math was right today. That never happens. The best part is in the real world, you calculate all your times perfectly carefully, and then you find out that you're delayed. You get a call from air traffic control saying, oh, could you hold at such and such? For the record, by the way, I don't think I've ever had to hold a real aircraft. It's just not a thing that's ever come up. Sure, in the simulator, you might get zipped on VATSIM or something like that, but it's not very common. All right, looking pretty good. I'm watching my CDI at the top there. It's migrating. Oh, I think I may have gotten it today. Fingers crossed, fingers crossed. I've got to concentrate. I've got to concentrate. Hello? Hello? That's a great movie, by the way. I'm sure you'll figure out which one it is. They're running on instruments up. Anyway. There we go. Looking pretty good. I'm noticing that I'm capturing the localizer before I capture the glide slope. That tells me that I'm a little bit too far left. I know you're sitting there going, huh? Take a look. See what I mean? Slightly left. Hypothetically, I should capture the glide slope at the same time as the localizer, but that's not going to happen. Okay, take a look at the top right CDI. See how the main line there, I guess I'm going to call it the noodle line now, the lubber line, is starting to move towards the center. Now I'm going to go ahead and start bringing the aircraft to the right so that it can start lining up with the end of the runway. That's exactly what we're doing here. Again, no automatic pilot, just doing it the old-fashioned way. All right, I know there's a gentle crosswind coming from my right. So as a result, I expect that needle to be constantly pushing that way as well. All right, looking good. 1,900 feet. Stand by for landing sequence. My feet are now on the rudders. Landing light's good. I'm off course already. Nothing new there. Let's come to my left just a tiny bit. One trick I found when you're doing these approaches is it's actually easier to use your feet to do those itty bitty tiny movements rather than relying completely on, just using ailerons, because you're going to affect your lift and everything when you hit those ailerons. All right, looks like we're recentered. Put it right there. Center the aircraft. Turn it bank. Start working on your scan. All right, what are we waiting for now? Well, now we're going to be waiting for Pinnet intersection. This is where our glide slope, we're going to be intersecting it. We're actually below where we need to be right now, which is actually a good thing, because that means that we can worry about descending rather than ascending, which, of course, anybody who's flown the Cessna 152 for any length of time can say it's a bit of a project to make it go up. All right, I got to come to my left just a little bit. I'm so slightly off course here. That looks good. All right, on our way down, we're going to start thinking immediately about our missed approach procedure. So in our case, our missed approach procedure, I believe, is we have to climb on the 6-9 radial out of Groton. So I'm going to go ahead and quickly set that up. Can't do this while I'm driving at the same time. Lovely. Now we got to go all recentered again because I was too busy wheeling the little thing. But literally, that's how much concentration that really takes. 5-5, give it a little tiny tug to get us back to neutral. And we're mostly back on course again. All right, we're just about to cross Pinnet. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to reduce my throttle. This is really important you do this before you hit the glide slope. Start slowing the plane down. I'll go ahead and bring in my first notch of flaps. Lovely. As soon as I intersect the glide slope, I'm going to go ahead and bring in my next notch of flaps. I'm going to come back to my left because now I'm just going to put myself way off the runway here. Start using that trim. Whoop, that was an aggressive maneuver. Don't do that. We've gained a little bit of altitude here, but again, I think I'm chasing the glide slope. A little more trim, a little more trim, a little more trim. Second notch of, whoa, we just hit a gust. Either that or we just hit patented Microsoft trim. All right, here we go. Descent. So we're going to set ourselves up at 500 feet per minute. And we're going to try to keep the cross up at the top right there, perfectly centered. Let's see what we got. Flaps are down. I am off course. Altitude, we're a little high. All right on altitude, off course. We got to come to our right more. Oh boy, was that a gust. Holy smokes, that almost flipped the plane. Looks good. Altitude is perfect. We are off course. Oh man, this thing really needs some trim when you take the power out of it. Airspeed low. Whoa, that's a gust. All right, we're right on altitude. We're right back on course. Swing back to my left a little bit. Keep your scan going. I'll be a little heavily handy here. Airspeed's good. A little high. Try to keep it gentle. A little high. A little high, a little to the right, left. Too much. Mostly on course, too high. If you hear any grunting noises, that's me trying to stay on target. Way too high. Slightly off to the left. Ooh, this turbulence is real. Swing back to the right a little bit. Should be good right there. Altitude is good. Start thinking about our decision altitude. So in this particular approach, our decision altitude is a little over 200 feet barometric. So when we hit 200 feet, we have to decide whether or not we're going to land. All right. right, we should be pretty good. That crosswind's catching me just a little bit, and that turbulence is killing me. Either that or it's the trim. One of the two. Oh boy, this thing really wants to jerk that direction. Not unusual. Now note, as you start getting closer and closer and closer to the actual ILS, the needle is going to get tremendously sensitive. Like all of a sudden, you're just going to see it go, whoa, to every single little twitch. It's important that you just stay steady. Use your feet to help kind of cancel out a little bit of that motion, and just relax. Like I can see immediately that I'm a little low and I need to come to my left a little bit. Oh man, that turbulence is real. Not terrible, just it's there. All right, I'm back on course. Got to swing back to the right a teeny tiny bit. Yes, I know what you're thinking. Shoot. Check my instruments. Looks good. Got to come to my right a little bit. Altitude. It's good. We're way off course now. Oh man, we're getting high. Alright, we have about 500 feet to go before we have to decide whether or not we're going to land. I'm a little high. Speed is perfect. Flaps are down. Gunfuls, gas, undercarriage, mixture, propeller, flaps, light speed. We're good. A little high. Come down just a teeny bit. Stand by for decision altitude. That speed is a little high. We are slightly off to the left or right still. Altitude is perfect. Steady. 250 feet before decision altitude. Speed is good. Oh man, I'm like hurting my hand here. 200 feet to go. Airspeed good. I am right on course. A little low. A little high. Right on. Don't touch anything. Decision altitude coming up in 100 feet. Speed is good. Yeah, a little slow. A little high, a little high. Don't overdo it. Not at this altitude. Looks good. Whoa, this is not the time to be loading in new scenery. A little high. Decision height, landing. Now we switch to a good old-fashioned visual landing. This would be terrible if I forgot the landing gear after all that, you know what I mean? We're here. All right, going missed approach. So we did our successful landing, and we're here, and that's really all there was to it. And now I've got a crink in my neck for some reason. So if we were to go a missed approach, basically what we would do is follow the instructions. In this case, what we'd have to do is we'd have to find the radial that we need to climb onto and go up to a certain altitude. I'm going to go quickly take a look at that as the aircraft is doing its initial climb out real quick. Let's see here. We need to do 2,000 feet on radial 62. So now what we do is we set this to radial 62. And then we go ahead and slowly climb ourselves all the way back up to 2,000 feet barometric altitude. So in this case, we need to go, oh, there it goes. Yeah, we overdid it. It's all right, though. Oh, no, this is not the time for scenery to load in. So if you take a look at the bottom CDI, you can see that thing is starting to shoot away very, very aggressively. I missed it. Why? Because I'm literally at the station, so it's going to be a little extra sensitive. All right, I'll face east until I reacquire it. Oh, boy, this is getting twitchy. And come back towards 62 degrees. I think I can catch it this time. Not bad. Not bad at all. Of course, I failed because I did not climb at the correct speed. But I think you guys have a good idea. All right, hopefully this video was helpful. You can see what it looks like to plan. You can see what it looks like to execute. If you have interest, I could try to do this with one of the glass cockpit aircraft instead of this old propeller jockey that's only got the 2 CDIs here. But again, this is just sort of a neat little intro to what you can do without using a GPS. Enjoy.